So I'm very pleased to be here today and have this opportunity to share some of our work today. What I'm going to be speaking about today is litter of origin on sow lifetime productivity. So what I hope to accomplish today is show you that litter of origin does exist and it has major effects on the lifetime productivity of sows within the herd. What I'm going to show you is evidence for induced litter phenotypes in commercial sow populations, and show you the impact of having sows that display the low birth weight phenotype on maternal and commercial sows, specifically showing the productivity of those sows in the herd and discussing some of the lifetime productivity of the replacements that are produced. At the end, I'm going to show some management interventions such as plant culling and postnatal management strategies. So there's considerable evidence in the litter showing the negative consequences of having low birth weight pigs in production. And it's quite a negative economic impact. If we look specifically at within litter variation in birth weight, so small pigs within a larger litter, it has many negative effects on both prenatal and postnatal development. It's usually the result of intrauterine growth retardation and causes runting, increases in preweaning mortality, negatively affects growth rate, carcass quality, and reproductive potential. And what I'm going to focus on for the remainder of the talk is the decrease in reproductive potential. So this is some preliminary data that Dr. Billy Flowers has reviewed in the blueprint series that George was mentioning earlier. And he looked at the relationship between birth weight and how long gilts remain in the herd. And this is irrespective of litter of origin. So what Billy reported, gilts were classified based on their birth weight of less than 1.1 kilograms, 1.1 to 1.6, and greater than 1.6 kilograms. So it is very evident to see the drastic effect that birth weight has on retention rate of these gilts. If we look specifically at the low birth weight gilts here, only about 40% of the gilts originally entered are present and ferried at their first parity, compared to over 80% in the heavier birth weight gilts. And if we look out to fairing at parity 6, we can see that those low birth weight gilts, only about 11% remain at 6th parity compared to about 40% of the heavier weight gilts. And what Billy suggests is these low birth weight females might not just possess the reproductive capacity to have good lifetime performance. So what I want to introduce now is the concept of litter of origin, or the low birth weight phenotype. I'm going to show you the evidence that these exist in the commercial sow populations, but what I really want to stress is that this affects the whole litter, not just individual pigs within the litter. So the phenotypic trait that we're looking at here is birth weight. It is controlled by the genetic makeup of the sows. However, it is affected by these complex interactions of several component traits, such as those traits that measure control litter size, such as ovulation rates and embryonic survival, and those traits that control prenatal development, such as uterine capacity and placenta function. So for example, if we have an older multipara sow who's most at risk at this, that has a very high ovulation rate, and they have very low embryonic loss, we know it'll have a negative effect on placenta function, and this will result in low birth weight litters. And this, again, affects the entire litter. So this is some of the data that really shows that the induced litter phenotypes exist. This data we have collected in conjunction with our project at the National Pork Board, and this was collected at Holden Farms. So what this graph shows is the relationship between total born and average litter birth weight. So each one of these individual points represents an entire litter, and overall we have about 3,000 litters measured and about 40,000 piglets have been measured over the last year. So as you see, there's an overall negative relationship. So the more pigs you have, the lighter the litter is going to be. And if we look specifically at a litter sizes between 10 and 17, this is excluding the extremes and where most of the females fall, you can see the difference accounted for in the difference in litter size and average litter birth weight is only a few hundred grams. However, if we look at the variation within any specific total born, as highlighted here, there's over a kilogram difference between the lowest litters and the highest litters. What we also want to show is that the low average litter birth weights is just not a consequence of increasing total born. So we can, as shown here, there's an increasing lack of high birth weights due to prolificacy. So you can see here it's due to uterine capacity. The sow just isn't capable of having high litter birth weights. In comparison, if we look for the existence of low birth weight phenotypes, we can see there's an entire population of sows that, irrespective of total born, will have a low birth weight of their litters and low, smaller pigs. The next thing we want to show is that this low birth weight phenotype is repeatable. So it's the same data set, but we have highlighted specific sows within the population. So these sows, there's 2 sows here and have had 3 parity measurements. We've classified them as low birth weight phenotype, and for every one of their litters, their average litter birth weight is just about a kilogram. And then conversely, there's high birth weight phenotypes that exist. So these are 3 highlighted sows here, but for every one of their litter measurements, they have large litter sizes. This is just another slide in a different way to show you the same thing, that the low birth weight phenotype is repeatable. So what I've done, we've measured sows from up to 4 different parity measurements, starting at parity 2 and 3. So some of these sows get up to 6 parity at the end. And I selected probably about the bottom 10 to 15% and the top 15% of gilts that had the most repeatable phenotype with the least amount of variation. So what this slide shows, again, if a sow displays a low birth weight phenotype, she will never display the high birth weight phenotype. In comparison, if we look at litter size, this is irrespective of litter size that these phenotypes exist. So what this really does, it confirms our previous results, is that the nucleus and multiplication sows that first give birth to a low birth weight phenotype will never have a high birth weight phenotype. So it really gives you opportunities for future management interventions. So what I think I've done so far is show you data to show that litter of origin, and specifically the low birth weight phenotype, does exist. And now I want to show you the negative effects of these phenotypes will have on the productivity of the low birth weight sow and the overall lifetime productivity of the replacements that are produced. So the question we're going to ask is, what is the impact of the low birth weight phenotype on maternal line sows and sow lifetime productivity? George already gave this definition earlier, what the National Pork Board has defined sow lifetime productivity as. But I think when we're looking at maternal line sows, we're going to do a slight modification of this definition. So it'll be the total number of quality replacement gilts produced during the productive lifetime of that female. And I think you'll see the reason why for this modification in the next few slides. What I'm going to show you is that sows that exhibit a repeatable low birth weight phenotype will have poor and low selection rates. They will produce very few select replacement gilts. The replacement gilts that they produce are going to have compromised sow lifetime productivity. And these sows will pass their traits onto their progeny or our replacement gilts. So this graph shows why low birth weight sows have poor selection rates. And it's just 3 sows that I've highlighted. So if we look at sow number 1 here, her litter size, total born, was 20 with a born alive of 16. She is quite prolific. But if we look at her female progeny produced, they had birth weights around the kilogram. But we can see by weaning or shortly after, every single one of her females was called for being a runt. So the selection rate in her replacement females is 0 out of 7. In comparison, if we look at sow number 2, she wasn't as prolific, so her total born was in like the normal range. Most of her gilts were under a kilogram. She had a couple of gilts that, despite having a higher average birth weight, about 1.4 kilograms, we still have to remember that the induced litter phenotypes affect the whole litter. So as you can see, either at weaning, these females were called as runts, And even if we look at selection at 150 days of age, these females are still being called as runs at this older ages. So this sow had a selection rate of 1 out of 6. And finally, this last sow, as we can see, again, very low average litter birth weight. And again, all her female progeny have been called by selection. So she had a selection rate of about 1 out of 9. So what we really suspect in these commercial line multiplication units is there's multiplication sows that never actually put a female into production. So this graph is just showing the same data. This is solely related to birth weight and not necessarily litter of origin, but we can extrapolate this data to show that it will apply to litter phenotypes. So similar to the data that we showed earlier, I classified gilts based on their birth weights. So we have less than a kilogram all the way up to greater than 1.75 kilograms. And you can see there's substantial numbers in each one of those categories. So again, what this data really shows is those gilts with the lowest birth weights are really going to have compromised retention rates. So even at first service, less than 40% of these gilts were served compared to around 70% of the heavier birth weight gilts. And again, this will apply to the entire litter. So this data is some exciting data that we have too. We had a summer student with us this summer out of Dr. Bercelosa's lab, and Julia spent probably a good 4 weeks or 5 weeks down at Holden Farms. And what she was measuring is the gilt body weight of stillborn females at birth, and then she was dissecting them to get overall uterine weight at birth. So as you can see, there's a very nice positive relationship between the gilt body weight at birth and the overall uterine weight. So the question we really need to answer is these gilts with the lowest birth weight also have the lowest uterine weight, but are these the gilts that are going to be the most compromised and poorest lifetime fertility? So this slide shows the impact of the gilt, a generational effect. So this is a different data set. It's out of a CPIG data set in a Canadian herd we've been working at. We measured dam performance of up to 6 parities and classified the sows as being low birth weight and high birth weight. So 1.1 compared to 1.5 kilograms. And then we looked at the performance of these daughters produced. So then we measured these daughters' performance over 6 parities. And as you can see, the low birth phenotype was passed on from the generations, as was the high birth weight. And again, there's confounded a bit by litter size, as the low birth weight gilts litter size was at least numerically a bit higher. So we'd largely focused on the effect that might be on the maternal herd, and the commercial line sows would have the same effects, but they're also going to have negative effects on the performance of their offspring, such as increased preemie mortality, reduced survivability, reduced growth rates, increased variation, and slower growing pigs take more days to market. So again, we're just kind of putting up a quick summary slide. I think now you can see the negative effects on the overall productivity of those low birth weight sows. Now we want to look and see if there's any management and postnatal interventions we can apply that kind of have a positive effect of this negative trait. So the first question we want to ask is that can the efficiency of the nucleus of multiplication farm be improved by non-selecting the low birth weight phenotype sows from the herd? This is just a summary of the data we have collected with the National Pork Board project. We have over 600 sows that we have at least 3 to 4 measurements of average litter birth weight and a reliable phenotype. So you can see here, average litter phenotype over at least 3 to 4 measurements goes from less than the kilo to upwards of 2 kilograms. These lines here show the effect of total born. So the line is slightly decreasing, but you can see the large variation that exists. So what we'd even recommend calling, if you can even call the low as 5% of those litters, and those sows that repeatedly produce litters of less than a kilogram, this will probably have positive effects on the replacement. So this slide is just a kind of a bit of food for thought and get you thinking about strategic culling within the herds. We have sow 1 and sow 2. You can see sow 1 here is a very prolific sow. So over her 6 parities, total born was 17.4 and a born alive was 15.4. In comparison to sow number 2, that on average produced fewer pigs than the herd average, had a total born of 12 and born alive 11.8. However, now if we show you average litter birth weight, you can see that the consequence of this sow having high numbers at birth, average litter birth weight was 1.1 kilograms. Compared to this sow, her average litter birth weight of the females produced was 1.8 kilograms. So if we extrapolate this data to show the potential of retention rate, this female at best probably had 40% of her female progeny served, compared to nearly 70% of sow number 2. And I think this is even a generous number, because as I showed before, there are going to be some sows within the herd that actually don't put any females into production. So I think what's most important on this slide is that getting a measure of litter birth weight is important, and if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So in conclusion of that previous slide, some postnatal management interventions should be to measure birth weight to determine the phenotype of your sows. You can do planned culling of sows that repetitively display this low birth weight phenotype. An idea to help with the management of these low birth weight phenotype sows is to put them into specific spots in the farrowing room so you can really manage them and really focus on them. Jeff had indicated this earlier, that adequate colostrum intake is very important, as we know, but more and more data in the literature is showing is that adequate colostrum intake during the first 2 days of life really promotes normal uterine development, and that the lack of colostrum intake could potentially negatively impact uterine capacity and reperformance of these gilts as adults. The final management strategy we're going to discuss is that of Dr. Billy Flowers. Just going to review this quickly, and he talked about this strategic cross-fostering. So Billy has conducted studies that reduce the overall litter size in which the female is lactated, and has shown this has had significant effects on longevity, farrowing rate, and tended to increase numbers of pigs born over 6 parities. What we're just going to show here is the effect on overall retention rate. So he's lactated 2 different groups of females of litters less than 7 and litters greater than 10. And as you can see, at every stage of production, these females that lactated in a smaller group had an advantage. What Billy has shown as well, if we look at the birth weight categories at birth, this strategic culling practices was affected by birth weight. So in the heavier weight gilts, lactation size had no effect essentially. But if we look at those gilts that had a birth weight of 1.1 to 1.6, lactating them in smaller groups significantly increased their overall production over 6 parities. It's about a 20% difference. And if we look at the lightest weight gilts, although it had an increase, it wasn't as significant as the median group. So as we suggested before, maybe these low birth weight gilts just aren't gilts that you should be considering for replacement females. Billy has suggested that the reason for this improvement is likely due to the decrease in competition during lactation and the enhancement of the early development of the reproductive organs. The minimum number of piglets is unknown, and this is what he's spending time, him and his graduate student, trying to answer that question. And he really suggests the best opportunity for improvements might be on these medium weight gilts or any future replacement female that you may have. And again, like I mentioned, this is the subject of his current study. So just in conclusion, I think what we've done is showed you of litter of origin does have a major effect on lifetime productivity. I showed you the evidence that these low birth weight phenotypes exist in the herd. We've confirmed that low birth weight phenotype is repeatable and repeatable over generations, and that gilt born from low birth weight phenotype sows will have compromised sow lifetime productivity. And also, I think we have shown that there are some management interventions that can be used to counteract these negative effects, such as strategic culling of the low birth weight phenotype sows and specific management interventions. So just quickly, what I'd like to show you is just the future work that we're conducting in this line of work. Currently at Holden Farms, we have over 600 sows currently in production that we have determined the low birth weight phenotype. To date, and this number will probably nearly double, we have over 5,000 gilts that have been individually tagged at birth. So we know their birth weight phenotypes and birth weights, and we're going to monitor them for retention and the productivity to at least third parity. We have some future studies, as I mentioned. Dr. Flowers doing some more strategic cost fostering work and litter manipulation studies. We have Dr. Robert Knox looking at the effect of litter of origin on various aspects of the onset of puberty in gilts.